Hey, my name is Josh, and I'm going to make a video containing everything you need to know to get up to date on your Armory development. So let's just get into it. First, you want to go to the armory3d.org website, and then you just want to hit download. And you're going to go to this link, and you can just skip the tipping, and then you can choose whichever software development kit you want to use. I recommend the latest version. Then after you download that, you'll see it in your downloads. And now that's going to be an add-on. So you need to use Blender LTS for 2.9. I can indicate that. So you're going to want to use the LTS 2.93 version of Blender. That's the version, at least when this video is uploaded, that's going to be the long-term release of Blender that's going to work with Armory. So when you have 2.93.7, you can then use it by going to your preferences, install, and then select the downloads for Armory. Using this one, and then you can install the add-on. I've already installed it, and then you can see it in your add-ons, and then just turn that on. You may need to restart Blender when you do it the first time. So, what is Armory? Armory is a built-in engine that is using the. So, what is Armory? Armory helps take your Blender projects and turn it into a game. This is a totally normal 3D scene, but when I have Armory attached to it, I can just make a scene. I can start an instance of a game instantly just by hitting the F5 button. So when I hit F5, oh, you have to save the file first. So we'll just go tutorial. So after you save the file and then you just hit F5, this will bring up the Armory renderer. See, now not much is going on because we don't have any logic yet, but it inherits the camera and it uses that as the thing that you are rendering to your screen. So let's start by moving the cube around in Armory. So to do that, all we have to do is select our cube, and then you'll see that we have these things called Armory traits and Armory props. We'll focus more on the traits. And to give our cube a trait, give it some logic, we want to go to the logic node editor. And then let's create a new tree, and we can rename it whatever you want, but I'll just keep it at node tree because this tutorial will focus on one specific tree. And then to apply this tree to this cube, we're going to click plus, select the nodes trait, and then we're going to have select the tree node tree. So now that we've selected node tree, we can now add a node such as, well, it is pretty confusing, all these things right here, but we know that we want input, right? So let's start with an input and then maybe get a keyboard going. So now you'll have to bring your cursor all the way down to see that you are about to add a keyboard node, and it's very small. So to scroll into the node tree, we can just use the mouse wheel on our mouse to zoom in, and then you can click on the middle mouse button to zoom around. Let's make it a little bit bigger as we're working with this. So right now we have keyboard space is going to do something. So what is it going to do? A quick way for you to add a node in the node tree editor is to hold shift and then A. This brings up the node add menu, which I just clicked over here. It's the same thing. So when I shift A, and now another cool thing is I can just tap S when I have this window open, and that'll immediately go to search. So if I tap S, it'll take me to a search bar where I can type out what do I want this object to do. I want it to move. Well, in Blender, we don't move things, we translate things. So when we search translate, we see, oh, translate object, translate on local axis. I'm going to select translate object because I want to move this object to the local axis. And we'll talk about this check mark in a second. So when we connect the out to the in, and we don't need to worry about what object it is because the cube itself has the tree tied to it. So it's just going to move it the way we want to. So let's say we want to move it in the positive X direction. So we'll just increase this by a little bit of an amount. So we save the scene, and then to test, we are going to see if we can press space and move the object. I run the scene with F5, and then it pops up, and I press space, and it moves it actually in the opposite direction that I thought. Well, actually, it must be if we wanted to move in this direction instead of this direction. Ah, I see, because this is the positive x side and this is the negative x side. We can change it to be negative 0.3 if we wanted to. Lock, save, spacebar, and it's moving the direction that I want it to move. Nice. This is the great thing about Armory is you can do a lot of trial and error right there, and just by quickly running the scene and seeing what's wrong with it. So let's make the cube move around like a tank. So another quick way to get more nodes in your node tree is to select more of them by clicking and dragging. So just holding your left mouse button as you drag over a section. And then we have both these selected. We can hold Shift and then D, which is the duplicate function in Blender, Shift D, and then we can just move our mouse another spot and drag a copy of this. So we don't want to copy, we want specifically to be able to turn left and right as a tank. So let's change the key instead of space to be A. And I don't have to search for where A is. I can just hit A and it'll know what I'm talking about. Boom. And then we don't want it to translate in that axis. We actually want to translate in the Y axis. So let me check my gimbal. This is the negative Y because the positive Y is where the Y is. So this is negative. This is positive. All right, so we want a negative Y, negative 0.3, sure. And then we can duplicate that again. And we can go D using the WAS controls here. So we'll do a positive 0.3. And let's change it from space to be more traditional. We'll change it to W. So now when we W, we go forward. But if we want to go back, let's do S. So if we do S, and then we change this to a positive, let's see what happens. So to recap, we've just duplicated the simple translate object feature, and now we have the WASD controllers. W, S, D, and A. Yep, this is what we would expect when we're moving a character around. But let's say I wanted to rotate the character when I pressed A and D, give it tank controls. So instead of translating the object, let's do something different. Shift A, S, and let's say we wanted to rotate the object. So if we do, we control the output by clicking and dragging the out into the in, and then selecting, we want it to rotate on the Z axis, 0.1. Let's see if that's the right way to go. You can't quite tell, so let's try to make it a bit more drastic. Oh, I see. So, yep, that's how you rotate in that direction. That's the right direction, but it's rotating way too much. So let's limit it back to, say, 2. Okay. So I'm pressing the A key. Oop, I don't know what happened. I'm pressing the A key, and it's rotating the incorrect direction. So we'll change it to -1. It's still a little bit too fast for me. So let's duplicate this, Shift D, drag the out to the in, and make it +1 for when it's D. So let's try this again. Oh, we seem to be moving very fast. So let's add rotational controls to our object instead of translational controls. So I can Shift A, S, and search for rotate object. Nice. Let's link it up with the out to the in, and then we can change. We want to rotate around the Z, so this axis, the vertical axis. So let's make it negative 0.05. We can duplicate that and change that to be positive 0.05. All right, let's try that out. Well, it's rotating the right direction, but I'm realizing that it's rotating incorrectly. So when I'm holding down A, I'm going the wrong way. I want it to be the other way around. So let's switch the minus signs. Now it's rotating the right way, but when I rotate this way, I've rotated the front of my cube in this direction. I want it to go forward in this direction, but it's not doing that. When I hit W, I'm still going sideways. So the reason that is because we're not applying this translation vector on the local axis. So when we rotate it, it'll keep the local axis fixed to it. So when it rotates, it'll be in that certain direction. So it starts here, but as we rotate, when it moves forward, it'll move in the direction that we rotate. So if we change that to on local axis, and then retry, yep, this is a lot more like how I want it to happen. Perfect. Also, it's a little confusing just having this cube rotate around the scene because we can't really tell what the front of the cube is. No, we can't, no. So let's edit our cube to make it a bit more functional. So I just quickly modeled a little tank out of our cube so that we can see which way it's facing, and eventually we're going to add projectiles coming out of the cannon. This isn't a tutorial on modeling specifically, so you can just watch the zoom up and try to follow along with the screencast keys, but this is just a quick little thing I made in a couple minutes. So let's go back to Armory, and now if we try to run it, now it's a lot easier to see where we're facing and what's going on. Wonderful. Isn't that cool, just being able to make your model come to life so quickly? So, it's currently very empty right now. It's just our one guy. So let's add a plane. That's simply adding a plane for the floor, bringing it down, and then scaling it up nice and big to about 20. And then, so that it doesn't fall through this plane and we want it to rest on top of this plane, let's make this plane a physics object. Physics object is how we add physics type functionality to our game without having to program it ourselves. So I just simply went to the plane, clicked on the physics tab right here and said rigid body. I can do that again. I just click on this little thing, click on rigid body, and this creates a rigid body for the plane. We don't want it to be active, we want it to be passive, we want it to stay in place. So we don't need to worry about like weight or mass or anything like that. We just want it to be a passive wall sort of for our character. And for the tank, let's rename our player to tank. We also want it to be a rigid body as well, but we don't want it to be passive because then it doesn't move. We want it to be active, and it also responds to the collisions. Another thing is that it by default it saves its shape as a convex hull. If we change that to box, you'll see that it makes the player look like this. And this is a quick way to make our game more efficient if we just handle the collisions as a box instead of the actual convex mesh of the player. So I'm going to change that to box, and then I'm going to replay the scene. And you'll see that it landed on the ground. And now we have a tank that rotates on the ground, which is awesome. But also, the camera's a little close for the tank, so let's move the camera back. Let's get our view in a certain position that's great for the tank. Let's say here. Let's do a top-ish down type view. Make it nice and large. And then if you ever want to snap the camera to what you're looking at, you can do Control-Alt-0 on the numpad, and that'll snap the camera to what you're looking at. So now if we play, you'll see that we have a nice aerial view of the tank and what it's doing. Wonderful. All right. Also, I want to change the lighting a bit. So let me change this by deleting it and then adding a sunlight by going to light, sun, bringing it up. And then you can rotate it by just doing Shift-T, and that'll automatically, I did Shift-R. I meant Shift-T, and that'll let you control the ray of where the sun is going. So I'm just going to do a Shift-T like this. And then let's change our tank to be a different color. We can do that by going to the materials, just adding a new one. Make it a nice green tank by changing the color to a lovely green. Let's see. Doesn't seem to be showing up yet. That's because we're not in material view. There we go. So let's make the green a little darker. And also, let's make this wall a texture. I mean the plane checkered texture so we can see ourselves moving over it more easily. We can do that by just opening up the we can do that just by changing this window to the texture node editor. And then when we edit the nodes for the new material that we have, we can set it to be by going We can do that just by going to the shader editor and then being able to select add a texture node by searching for texture. Let's make it a checker texture. And then just plug that into the color. Let's make the scale a little bit different. And there you go. Now it's a lot easier to see the movement of the tank over the checker texture. Yep, looks great. All right. Let's say we wanted to add some acceleration to our tank, like you're stepping on the gas. We can do that by going back to the logic node editor and changing the tree to, instead of translate the object, what if we wanted to apply a force to it? Let's delete these two and change it to a force in this direction by about 10. And let's make sure we check on local axis. Then we'll make this -10. Oh, I seem to have messed up the keys again. I'm pressing W, but I'm going backwards. But you can see I am applying a correct force. Wonderful. So I'll change this to -10 and this to +10. Now you can see the tank speed up as it holds forward, and you can see it go backward as you hold backward. Yep, now this is a tank. So that's great, but there's one concern, is that if I go too far, I'll fall off the edge and then I can't get back. So let's make some walls for our play area. That's as simple as just adding a cube and then going into edit mode and scaling it up a bit by constraining it on the x-axis, making it a little tall, shrinking it, and then expanding it on the y. That's great. Now swip out of edit mode and then just move it over to one edge. And then here's a quick way to make this wall go around your entire plane. If we just change the pivot point by pressing period and then holding down period, I go to 3D cursor. This will change the pivot point to the center of the cube. Actually, let me reset the 3D cursor because right now it's on the side of the tank, so it won't be accurate. If you do Shift C, this will reset your view to the sum of all the objects in the scene. And this will reset the 3D cursor to the center of the scene. So now that the pivot is on the 3D cursor, do Shift D, because we have the wall selected, R, Z, and then do it 90 degrees. This rotates the object 90 degrees along the Z axis, and then after you hit done, you can do Shift R to repeat what you just did, and then Shift R again. So it's not perfect, but if we scale it in a bit, it's basically fine. It may not be perfect, but we can scale up the platform just a little bit so that way it covers everything. Let's fix this problem by adding some walls around our scene. You can simply add a wall by creating a cube, going into edit mode and then scaling it on the Y, and then making it a bit taller on the Z. Now, out of edit mode, let's move it to the edge of our zone. If you want to snap to what you're looking at, you can press the period key on the numpad. Let's move it a bit closer. Now, if we want to rotate it around the scene rather than itself, we can change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. When you hit the period key on your keyboard and go to 3D cursor, And then you do Shift D and then Z, which will rotate it on the axis. And then go R 90. This will rotate it 90 degrees. Now we have it perfectly flush with each other, and it's rotated, so we have 2 walls done. And we can repeat this process just by doing Shift R 2 more times. Oh, there's one thing I forgot to do, and that's apply a physics body to this wall, because right now it's just a mesh. We can simply move the tank. When we move the tank, it simply goes through the mesh because we haven't added a rigid body to it yet. So let's fix that by selecting one object and then doing rigid body and changing it from passive. And instead of convex, we are fine with just box because it's just a box of a wall. Now let's select all the other elements, selecting this one last, and then bringing up the space bar, go to link. In the spacebar, type in copy traits from active object. Now we'll see that let's just add a rigid body and set it to passive for each of these walls. It won't take that long. Now, when we're moving around our tank, we won't fall off, we'll hit the wall, which is great. So that way we can not worry about having to run into each other. Now let's add some projectile motion. Let's shoot some bullets from the front of this gun. So to do that, let's look at our tank and we'll create an empty with the mesh. Actually, we go here to empty, and just a plain axis will be fine. Move it a little bit in front of the tank. Let's do it in front of the barrel. So let's do it pretty close there. Now let's create our bullet. So we can just do Shift A, and let's say our bullet's going to be round. Now it's kind of hard to see, so if you wanted to edit something and hide everything else in the scene, you can press the slash on your numpad. It's above the 8 key. Numpad slash will just put it into a local view and you can focus on that. So let's rotate it on the Y, and then let's extend the back a bit. And then flatten it. SX0. Oh, I see. We're still using the pivot point, so we're going to want to hold period and switch back to median if we want the normal things that we're used to. SX0. And now we flatten this out to be a nice looking bullet. Let's shade it smooth, and let's change the color by applying a material. Bullet yellow. And let's make it a orangey dark material. Great. That looks just like a bullet to me. Now, we don't want the bullet to be in... Oh, also to unhide everything, just hit the slash key again and you go back to normal. Obviously, this bullet is way too big. So let's go back into edit mode and shrink the bullet. It's not going to shrink where I want it. I want it to shrink around the object geometry orange dot, which is the center. So we're going to just go back into object mode and shrink it down this way. Now, to make sure that it works properly, we're going to apply a scale. So this reflects when we summon it. So this bullet you can't see because it's inside of the tank, but if we move the tank, you'll see that the bullet is still hovering right there. We don't want that. So for one thing, we want the bullet to actually respond to physics, so let's make the bullet a physics object by going to physics, this tab right here, rigid body active. We want it active because it's going to move. And let's make it a very small mass because it's a tiny bullet. About 0.2 kilograms is fine. And convex hull will be fine. I would prefer capsule maybe, but convex hull will give us a better effect as we use it. Now, let's rename the sphere to bullet, because we want to keep track of it later. And we're going to want to hide this bullet when the scene starts, because we don't want it just to stay there. So, to hide a bullet, we're going to make a new collection. And we're going to name it hidden, because these are the elements that are not going to be in the scene by default when it starts. So, let's turn off the visibility of hidden so that we don't have to see anything, but the bullet will be visible because it still has the eye next to it. Now that that's hidden, let's go back to our graph, our node tree, and also, this is fine. Let's move this out of the way, and we can do that parameterly by doing Control-J when we select a group of nodes that we're fine with, and that'll save it in a frame. And frames are great because you can rename the frame if you go to node and change it to movement. That's not what I want. We can change the text to be we can change the label to be movement so that it reflects itself in the scene. And we can also change the color to be something unique, like a red perhaps. So now we can move this out of the way and make our bullet summoning things. So if we do A and search for a spawn, because we want to spawn a specific object, perfect. So where do we want to spawn this object? We want to spawn this object in front of the tank where this empty is. So let's get the transform of the empty. So we just want to get transform, perfect. And then we just plug in the transform to this and make the object. We can use the eyedropper to say we want to select the empty, or we can just click on the drop down and select empty, because that's where it is. Now what do we want to spawn? We want to spawn the bullet, of course. So we can't eyedropper the bullet, that's why I wanted to name it so it'd be easy to find, bullet. Now, what do we want to do when we spawn this object? We want to shoot out. So let's apply an impulse. An impulse is like setting the physics state to be at a certain time. We want it to spawn with a certain amount of speed. We don't want to apply the force to give it speed. We just want it to have speed right out of the box. So we'll apply a pulse, an impulse. We also want to be on the local axis so the bullets fire with us as we're turning. And let's set it to be after you spawn, and we want the object to be the same object we just spawned, so we're going to connect the blue object tags together. And let's make the impulse, it'll be in the negative x, so we'll make it a negative 20. Now let's try it out. Oh, I've completely forgotten to summon the object that I was talking about. So to summon the object, we're going to want to get mouse, and then when you click started instead of down, so you fire by clicking the mouse button, not by just holding down the mouse button, and set the out to be here. Yep, there we go, we're firing bullets now. Oh, but for some reason, oh, that's right, the empty is staying right there. The empty needs to be tied to us. So to have the empty move with your tank, select the empty and then the tank, and then Control P, and object keep transform. Now let's retry that. Yep, now we're firing bullets, and they're behaving the way we thought we would. Wonderful. Now, you might have noticed that this bullet right here still exists. So to fix that, let's make it hidden in the collection as well. This should work, right? Oh, it's still there. Let's turn them both hidden and then right click and say visibility, hide all inside. All right. It's still there. Wonderful. So you can see that the ammo is piling up around the tank, but what good is a tank if it doesn't have anything to shoot, right? So let's add some objects that it can shoot at. So let's create a cube. Let's move it on the Y. And let's apply a rigid body and make it active so it reacts to physics. Let's also change the color, make it a nice blue. Now let's duplicate it, drag it on the X, duplicate it, drag it on the Y, on the Z I mean, drag it on the X, and now we have a little tower of crates that we can knock over. And now we're able to shoot the boxes and run into them, and it's awesome. So now you can add any type of objects you want and have your tank fire at them, shoot them around the place, drive through them. The sky's the limit, really. So, I hope you enjoyed this Armory tutorial, and I hope to hear from you again soon.